our session. Thank you. Hello, Bob. And thank you, of course, San Jose State University, my information school alma mater, for putting on these amazing virtual conferences and allowing us to all stay safe and healthy and where we are and off planes, but still connect library ideas. Okay. My name is Bria Sinnott, and I'm the Arts and Communication Librarian at Towson University in Maryland.
And I'm Elisabeth White, the Science, Technology, and Math Librarian, also at Towson University.
Yeah, so Elisabeth and I work with, very different disciplines. We do have a lot in common. We're both research and instruction librarians. We're relatively new library school graduates, and we both started here at Towson within the past year. And so as part of this cohort of new librarians at Towson, we've been getting together regularly to check in and swap ideas. And Elisabeth and I found that we were trying a lot of the same things in our information literacy sessions with students. And some things that might make others a little uncomfortable were just sort of making sense for us to try. And I'll just pause and say now that if you do have any questions, we have some time at the end to answer those. So if it's something urgent, like a logistics issue, feel free to raise your hand, and myself or Anne or Elisabeth will take care of you. Otherwise, we can save questions for the end of our presentation.
All right, so radical transparency involves stepping a bit out of your comfort zone. So we'd like to start our presentation by having you do just that. So I'd like for all of you to take a moment to ponder the question on your screen. What is something about your library or your job that you would never want to share with a student? Take a moment to think about that, and if you're willing, feel free to type your response into the chat.
Yeah. Elisabeth, what's one thing you would never share with students?
So I personally wouldn't want to share my salary with students. So I often will allude to the fact that librarians aren't particularly well compensated, given that our job requires a master's degree, but I think that giving the actual numerical salary would be stepping a bit too far out of my personal comfort zone.
Agree. Would maybe feel good for a minute and get you in trouble. I don't think I would share with students that. It always kind of rubs me a little bit when I hear someone call me or refer to new career librarians as baby librarians. I don't love that. I think I usually kind of keep that to myself, though. I'll share it with this group of 56 close friends right now, I guess. So I'm seeing some stuff in here, how often I don't feel like I know what I'm doing. I feel that. Oh yeah, social media info, very smart, very smart. So I think I'm seeing some things that maybe we haven't considered, but also I've never done a quantitative research project. I don't think I have either.
I definitely have, but I'm a unique situation where I come from a science background.
True. Yeah. I think we're going to address some of these in our presentation and maybe kind of think more on these. And we encourage you throughout to think, would I share this? Is this worth sharing? Is there value here? Right, so transparency in companies is not really a new concept. It's something that organizations have been investing in one way or another for quite a few years. And this idea of radical transparency first came across my desk by way of a Chronicle of Higher Ed article I read last year about the admission scandals going on. And it happened to be very in line with what I was also about vulnerability from researcher Brene Brown. And there's a lot of ways to define radical transparency, no dictionary definition, but I really liked this quote. It sort of summed up how I think Elisabeth and I are relating to it. And instead of reading this, I'm just going to kind of change a little bit of the language here and say radical transparency is creating a culture that is direct and honest in communication and sharing of library strategies, so that all people are trusting and loyal to the continuous evolution of the organization. For librarians, radical transparency is a way to build trust with students. And I just think that beautifully aligns with the service mentality that's associated with librarianship. And it really resonated with us.
All right, so now that we have an idea of how radical transparency can apply in library instruction, let's think of some of the benefits there are to being transparent with our students. The first potential benefit is that transparency promotes authenticity. If we're our personal experiences and some real world considerations that come up in our jobs, then students may see us as more relatable and feel more comfortable in the classroom as they get this idea that we really are real people with real concerns and not just these authoritarian figures at the front of the classroom. Radical transparency can also help us to correct some misconceptions about the role of librarians. I'm sure that everyone in the room at some point has batted some sort of misconception about what they do or explained to people that our job isn't sitting around reading all day or simply checking in and out books. We really do a lot more than that. So when we share some more details about our own daily work with our students, perhaps even those that you might not typically consider sharing, that can really help demystify the job of an instruction librarian. And you can even think of that as a really small form of advocacy to help people understand the importance of our role and to help students in particular understand where the library fits into their academic careers. Another benefit of transparency is that it can help students have a better understanding of the information landscape. By addressing some of the challenging issues that we face in libraries on a daily basis, we can connect some of these high-level information literacy concepts to our instruction and give students a better understanding, not just of the task-based skills that we're trying to teach them, but some of those broader information literacy concepts as well. Finally, it is beneficial because it allows us to build trust with our students. If we admit that there are limits to our expertise and show them that we're always looking to improve, we can actually empower our students to go along with us on our journey to grow as professionals. Now, another benefit is that we can very easily connect some of our radically transparent practices to the ACRL framework. Since by our instruction librarians at an academic institution, we often look to the ACRL framework for information literacy in higher education as a guide in planning our instruction. But we recognize that not everyone here may work in an academic library, so I wanted to take a moment to familiarize everyone with this framework. The ACRL framework provides a list of threshold concepts and associated dispositions and learning practices that we strive to promote in our instruction. They encourage us to move beyond task-based instruction, so beyond simply showing how you use a database or how you cite something in APA, and really pushing students to consider some higher level information literacy concepts and promote critical thinking. We identified 4 frames from the ACRL framework that are particularly relevant to radical transparency in our instruction. The first is information has value, which implores us to consider how information is used, what value it has in society, and why it's important to give proper credit to outside sources. The second is authority is constructed and contextual, which tells us to consider how the evaluation of the credentials of an author may depend on a user's information need. Third is scholarship as conversation, which involves the understanding that research doesn't occur in a vacuum and that we're all part of the scholarly communication process. Fourth is information creation as a process, which encourages us to think about how the creation process of an information resource influences how it is used and encourages students to reflect on their own research processes as well. Bria found some cute little icons to associate with each of these different frames that you'll see on the following slides and can use as a reminder of how what we're doing in our instruction relates to these. So information has value is a little diamond, authority is constructed and contextual is the little tools, scholarship as conversation is the speech bubbles, and information creation as a process is the gear icon.
Great. So let's dig in. How are we bringing this practice into the classroom? This is not an exhaustive list. These are just things that Elisabeth and I have been trying recently, this year, this semester. And it's sort of in regards to professional transparency and personal. And then we'll discuss a little bit about how we can take this information and use it for future growth and planning. So we've connected professional transparency to the frame scholarship is conversation, authority is constructed and contextual, and information has value. Now, one of the things I've been doing in my freshman year seminar classes this year has just and straight up sharing my job description. I would often say to students, I am your librarian. I am a resource to you. Here are some of the things I can help you with. And I was still being met with very surprised faces, or follow-up statements like, so does this mean I can email you or come in for help? And where I thought this was maybe an obvious thing, I was seeing it was not. So I thought the easiest way to combat this was to just clip something directly out of my contract, highlight the relevant parts, and throw it on the screen. This does a lot to make that invisible, sometimes invisible work known and show really the scope to the students and the faculty in the room of what we're doing inside the classroom and out. So Elisabeth and I also are very intentional about sharing information on library spending, especially on research resources when appropriate. And this always gets their attention. I mean, the students are shocked to hear the hidden cost of information they need, and it's something we all agree on.
And when I share resource costs with students, it's usually in the context of the amount of spending we have for scholarly journals. And I think this allows for a really good segue into a broader conversation about the scholarly landscape, where I can tell students about open access and encourage them to consider how different publication models could address some of the issues that higher education is experiencing at the moment, and perhaps allow students to consider supporting and perhaps even publishing in open access journals later on in their academic careers. I also have experimented with a more transparent calendar for my students. So you should see on the screen a screenshot of my You Can Book Me software, which is a scheduling tool that hooks up with my Outlook calendar and allows students to book appointments based on my available times. So in addition to reducing some email back and forth with students, which can be challenging when trying to schedule appointments, I found that having this tool helps students understand the various demands on my time. So when they pull up the calendar, they can see that no, they cannot schedule an appointment for an hour from now. I need some sort of advanced time to prepare. And they can also see that I am not generally available all hours of the day. I have other obligations, and I'm not just sitting at my desk waiting for that reference question to come in at the rest of the time.
Sometimes we are. Yeah.
Then I also like to be really transparent about what I've created in an information literacy session versus what I might be borrowing from other sources. So a lot of times as librarians, we're really good at finding great materials that others have created, and we repurpose those and reuse them, and that's wonderful. However, since we expect our students to give credit to outside sources in their own research, we should model the same behavior in our own instruction and let students know what we've created versus what we're borrowing from an outside source. It's really easy to say something like, now I have this video for you. And students might think it's something that you created, but in reality, you might be borrowing it from another library, or it's something that one of your colleagues created. So instead, you might say, here's this video from this library. You also might be tempted to say something like, I created this course guide for you on LibGuides, whereas the real situation is that the previous librarian in your position created that online course guide and you merely updated it for use this semester. So I think it's really important for us to be clear about the role that we played in our instruction sessions, since we're expecting the same of students when they are doing their own research and crediting outside sources.
Yeah, great point.
Now let's think about examples of personal transparency that can come up in our library instruction. And this relates to information creation as a process, and authority is constructed and contextual. The first example of personal transparency that Bria and I thought of was just being honest about our expertise. There are limits to what we know, and there are limits to what we feel comfortable helping students with, and that's okay. I like to be transparent about how I approach the answer to an unknown question. There have been many situations in classes where a student has asked me a question that I don't know the answer to, and I have Googled the answer to that question in front of everyone to be transparent about my process and let them know that, yes, even librarians may use Google sometimes. I also like to share my path to librarianship because it helps students understand where I'm coming from and it can let them know that I relate to what they're going through as science undergraduates. I was a biochem major in college, and I went through college expecting that I would go on to pursue a career in laboratory-based research. After working in a lab, after graduating from college, I quickly realized that I loved research, except for the laboratory piece of it. So I like to share this with students because first, it can allow students to respect my expertise a bit more since I have that experience of working in a lab and I know where they're coming from. But it also makes me more relatable to say that I tried this career path and realized it wasn't for me. So when students say that research is challenging, I can share that personal story with them to give a better idea of where I'm coming from as an instructor and let them know that I have a personal connection to what they're going through and I really get it. This can be difficult, and I'm more likely to do it in a one-on-one setting versus an instruction session because I don't want to undermine my authority, and I have to be careful of what I say in front of a departmental faculty member, as I don't want them to get the wrong ideas about my previous research experience. But I think it is really beneficial to throw in those personal stories when possible to help students understand us better as individuals.
Yeah, and in line with what you're saying, Elisabeth, too, I think there's something really lovely in being vulnerable with your students in that way. And that's kind of a part of this transparency, right? Is saying and admitting to them that part of why I appear so good at this is because I have a lot of practice. I do it often. I've worked with this assignment before. This is the first time you're doing it, but I've been through this before with other students. And being open about that, I think, really shows that research is a skill, right? That you're always developing. Of course, is a second career for me as well, as it is for many in our field. I really took a very slow and winding load to librarianship, and I will admit and be vulnerable here with you and with my students that I really didn't know 10 years ago or so that an MLIS was a thing. How can I expect others to understand this field if it took me most of my adulthood to kind of get to that realization? But now that I do have a degree, and I value those who do and do not in the field, but I share those credentials often. I put the letters at the end of my name, my email signature, put them on my screen, my introduction screen in the session. And I'm not doing this out of ego, but it's again to reinforce that this is skilled work that I have advanced training in, and it makes me a unique resource to students and faculty. Of course, the caveat in all of this is that while it's very good to go outside your comfort zone occasionally, only share what you are comfortable with and what you can legally share. And you want to be very careful that you're not selling yourself short, that you're not undermining your expertise, that you can be transparent, you can be vulnerable, but still be an authority in the classroom here. Next up, I see here, we're talking about our exit slips. And so we've talked a little bit about how students are benefiting from increased awareness of library practices and work, and that's spilling over to us. And is there any more ways we can kind of gain information from this practice? And Elisabeth and I have both retooled our exit slips to really prioritize students as the authority of their own education and learning, because they are. They know what is working for them, and we recognize that. So we're including questions about things that we feel unsure about and we want feedback on. Okay, exit slip. Yes, great question. So an exit slip is kind of how do we want to describe this? It might be a summary, quickie. It could be virtual or written, where we're asking students to traditionally probably give us some information on, like, can you find this? Can you describe this? And it's a way to assess their learning from the course. And so Elisabeth and I have sort of reimagined ours to more assess our teaching than their learning. And we find that we're still getting that information though, right? We're still seeing what they're learning. So this first image is from one of Elisabeth's. She's asking, what are you still confused about? How could I have made this session more helpful for you? And Elisabeth and I are both using Microsoft Forms for our slips. I think mine is 5 questions or less. Yours can't be that much longer, right?
Yeah, at least 7 based on this.
At least 7. That second snip right there is from one of mine this semester. The responses, what's one thing you learned about Oftentimes people write something kind of silly or that they didn't learn anything, and I accept that. What's one thing that you wish I'd spent more time on is a great way to kind of see maybe where they're wishing I was focusing the instruction on. And we're very clear with this, how we're using this information. So we say very explicitly, it's an anonymous form. Only I am going to see it. Well, not in the case of those 3 responses right there, but, and when we use it and take it, we're going to turn it around and use it to make the next iteration of this class better and stronger for the next student. So we're taking your authority and passing it along for future planning.
All right, so thank you so much for participating in this session. We want to invite you now to try to do something in your own instruction that makes you feel uncomfortable and to admit that to your students. It's great to step out of your comfort zone, and if you let your students know that you're doing it, that can make you a lot more relatable as well.
Yeah, and I think, you know, we weren't finding a ton of research on applying this practice to library instruction, so if this sounds in line with something you're trying in the classroom, we'd love to hear it either now or offline. We've got some time now to kind of revisit some of the chats here. I hope we answered that exit slip question. Let's see, even though I'm a school librarian, I find this discussion helpful. Thank you, Sharon. That wasn't a question, I just kind of humble bragged myself there.
I think there was a question at the end of it. Yes, what kind of experiences would you like students to have with the library in their young years?
Oh, so we're talking juvenile, young youth. Yeah, I think kids probably get it the most out of any population. They see the library as a partner, as a resource, whether they can verbalize that or not. And so, you know, maybe bridging the gap between those elementary years to middle school, high school, and then the gap between your professional adult years. What's one thing I would know? I don't know.
And I think anything that you can do to start promoting students in evaluating information from a young age is going to be very useful. Not just so that they're prepared to do that in their academic careers and they're picking the right type of sources for a college research paper, but just so that we can have a world of informed citizens who aren't spreading misinformation and are really starting to take a second look at things from an early age.
Yeah, and Melissa just shared a great article. We do have a few here. We're going to share our slides through the conference portal. These are sort of the things we either kind of stumbled along in putting this together. Brene Brown, I mentioned quickly, but she does a lot about student learning and teaching and vulnerability and kind of getting over that fear. So we will definitely share these slides.
And we found that there really isn't a lot of research out there that connects radical transparency to libraries or to instruction, but there is research out there about authenticity in instruction, which I think really clearly relates. So that's definitely an area that we're interested in pursuing further in our own research.
Yeah. So we had a comment from Becky about telling the students in the class that they're more of an expert on sociology than I am. And I get, yeah, like, have you ever been introduced in a classroom and the teacher is like, Bria is an expert in this field. And I'm thinking to myself, I am not an expert. But saying to students, you know, with your emerging expertise and my skills as a researcher, we are a very powerful research team, is something that is worth reminding them.
Right, and most librarians aren't responsible for being the liaison to just one department. If you happen to have a background in some of the areas that you're teaching, of course, that's extremely helpful to you, but the reality is that a lot of librarians are going to be teaching in areas where they don't have an undergraduate degree. For example, I don't have a lot of experience in computer science, but I'm still responsible for teaching those students. So a lot of times in the classroom, I'm hesitant to really draw attention to the fact that I'm not the biggest expert in that area, but a lot of times if I'm meeting graduate students or doctoral students one-on-one, then I'll be upfront about the fact that they have a lot more content-specific knowledge about computer science than I do, but I have the background of how to research effectively. And between the two of us, then we should be able to have a really successful collaboration based on our complementary expertise.
Yeah, we're a team. So, yeah, the job description, I think, you know, I'd have to leave the whole thing up there for a very long time, but
right.
It does get their attention.
Yeah, I haven't done a screenshot of that like Bria has, but I have often alluded to the fact that my job description is 4 pages long in tiny print. So
yeah, just
reminding students that we do a lot more than just that one session where we're meeting them and the individual consult that we ask them to engage in.
Yeah.
A lot of things that they have no idea about. And any information that we can share about the value of libraries is going to be beneficial.
So I really enjoyed this.
I did as well.
Yes, and I think if anyone has any more questions, I know people are starting to hop off to get ready to go to the next session, but we'll be online until 4:30. If anyone wants to type in the chat or raise your hand and get on the mic.
And feel free to email us too if you want to continue sharing things. You can have Bria bring up our emails again. Mine's very easy to remember if you like children's books. It's evwhite@towson.edu.
That's great. Thank you, Bria and Elisabeth. That was a wonderful talk.
Thank you.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. Thanks to everyone for your time, and enjoy the rest of your afternoon.